I saw my land in the morning, and oh, but she was fair. Come see my land, come see my land, before the particles of busy fires ascend, before the rivers descend underground, before coffee plantations grind the mountains into dust, before the coral dies, before the beaches disappear. Come see my land, come see my land, and know that she was fair.
She has seen her land in all its vast array, both from within and without, and the myriad of perspectives are reflected in the extensive catalogue of Poet Laureate of Jamaica for the period 2021 to 2024, Olive Senior. From prose to poetry, through fiction and non-fiction, Jamaica's third Poet Laureate since independence, Olive Senior, invested on March 17, 2021, takes readers on a journey from the deep rural existence of Jamaica to the cosmopolitan city of Toronto and all the spaces in between, retelling multi-generational stories. Olive Senior sat down with Yvonne Chin after the investiture ceremony to speak of her work, including the most current collection, Pandemic Poems First Wave, and how she aims to make poetry accessible during her tenure as Poet Laureate.
While you enjoy the honor, you're also thinking of the responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us
Yes.
a bit more about your thoughts around that.
Well, I feel that the job of the Poet Laureate is to make poetry accessible in whatever way. We all choose different ways. I would like to mobilize the Jamaican population to use poetry as a way of dealing with environmental issues. You know, so that there's a theme, I see my land, because, you know, we need to be concerned about what's happening, both in terms of the Jamaican landscape, but also globally, with global warming and so on. So I would like to use that as the main platform of my 3 years, that we will work to write and read poetry that celebrates Jamaica, but also brings to our notice those things that need attention.
Yes.
And I'd love particularly to sensitize young people to their responsibilities as caretakers of this land.
And so interesting that it started with you seeing your own land as a child.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about growing up, the early days growing up in the cockpit country. What was your experience like?
Well, I grew up in rural Jamaica near to Troy, Trelawney, and you know, we were poor. It was a community of small farmers, but we never knew we were poor. You know, there was a lot of community feeling. The community was raising the children, so we were free to roam, run up and down, and do whatever, have a kind of freedom at the time. And I was always a very curious child, and so I used to walk around the place and watch people doing things and fast myself in everything. And so I grew up. I didn't grow up with, you know, television or even radio. I grew up with storytelling at night, with people beating cassava or beating chocolate in the mortar, making cassava, digging yam hills, having, you know, it was that kind of rural life that in a way I suspect has passed away. But it shaped my consciousness. It made me aware of that Jamaica. And then I was conscious of another Jamaica, because, you know, there are two Jamaicas. And by the circumstances of my life, I ended up living between those two Jamaicas. And it was hard, but, you know, it was a perfect preparation for a writer, because it's given me an understanding of both of those Jamaicas, which, you know, it stood me in good stead as a writer and as a human being as well.
As you took in those two Jamaicans and interacted with others, did you find that you persons tried to place you in one or the other of those
yes,
Jamaicans?
they still do.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well,
they look at you and
yeah.
what happens?
They look at me and say, oh, you're the daughter of the plantation. You know, that's, I mean, I've got that over and over, which makes me laugh. I am, I guess, an anomaly in Jamaica. But, you know, I just I just decided at an early age I was going to be my own person,
Yes.
which I still am. I march to my own drum, and so if people want to place me where they want to place me, that's okay. I don't worry about it. I feel privileged to be able to enjoy the range of Jamaican life, even now. I feel comfortable wherever I go, you know.
And that certainly comes out in your work. Talk to us a little bit about your use of language, because you use the Jamaican language along the continuum so very well.
Well, I tell people I was raised on the book, like people of my generation, and so I learned to read at age 4 and then just devoured whatever came my way. So I was shaped by the English language and the love for it, but I also grew up with people who spoke Patois. And therefore, I consider myself bilingual. Yes. I always have. Though, of course, when I went to high school, you know, we were punished if they heard us speak in Patois. But when I came to write as an adult, I wrote short stories at the time, and I felt that I had to be true to my speakers, true to my characters. So my characters use the language they would use in real life. So there's the range from broad Patois to standard English and everything in between.
We are present in our various worlds, but we don't always see things. How important is it that the poet, the writer, the author is observant of the social space and the realities around them?
Well, I teach writing, and I always say to my students, if you want to be a writer, you have to be curious. Curiosity is, if you don't have that curiosity, forget it. And it's curiosity about everything.
Yes.
The minute I wake up in the morning, I start looking around me. I'm in the moment. If I encounter anything that I don't know about, I'll go and look it up. You know, I want to know. But that's just me. I mean, I'm kind of extreme that way, and I drive people crazy. But I do think that if you want to be a writer, you need to be curious. You need to be curious about the environment. But most of all, you need to be curious about people and the interactions among people. And a lot of my work, my fiction, some of my poetry is about, I'm interested in where people are coming from and how that shapes who they become. You know what I mean? We're all shaped by our childhood or circumstances. And so I look at individual history, but I'm also interested in our history as people. Where are we coming from? How is that shaping who we are today? So that all of that goes together, goes into the mix.
And so if you were to speak to some of the ideas that you'd want people to leave your poetry with, some of the thoughts around identity, who we are as a people, what would be some of those thoughts that you'd say, this is what I set out to say when I wrote this poem?
Oh, but I don't write like that. I don't I don't set out to project ideas.
Yes.
Meaning I don't separate my life and my art. So obviously, as Olive Senior, I have a lot of ideas about things, but that's not how it works. It's embedded in the writing. It will come out in the writing. But if I'm writing fiction, I allow my characters to say what it is that will bring out the message. But it's deadly if you try to write message or if you try to write ideas. So in my poetry, I use voice a lot. I take on the persona of various people that I'm writing about, and I allow them to speak. And that's a good poetic device, because I've always felt I want to take away myself from the work. Unlike some poets who put themselves in, I'm the opposite. I want to take Olive Senior out of the work, and I want to allow other voices to carry the burden of whatever I want to say.
And that's interesting, because you've straddled different worlds, the world of the journalist, the world of the editor, the world of the person writing both fiction and non-fiction. How do you then balance and kind of ride that wave so that you are able to switch and put on the mask for the poetry, but for the other parts of your career, to approach it differently? How do you balance that?
Well, I balance it because I don't think about balancing it. You know what I mean? I just get on with life. I do, you know, if I'm in the moment. Yes. So if I'm writing a poem, I'm writing a poem. If I'm teaching, I'm teaching. You know, if I don't have those ideas about life, to be honest. I just do what is calling to me at this particular moment in time. Yeah. That's how I function. And that is why I think I'm able to straddle various genres and so on, because I don't listen to what people say that, you know, you're a fiction writer or you're a poet and you're to stay in your space. I've never stayed in my space. I just carve out my own space. And because I do what I want to do, you know, and that is what gets me through life. That's how I approach things. And so 1 minute I'm writing poetry, and another minute it's something else, you know.
And this minute, Pandemic Poems called your name. So tell us a bit about Pandemic Poems.
Yeah, I brought the book, which is now out, yes. Called Pandemic Poems First Wave, because this ends late in 2020, and I'm still writing pandemic poems. So that will be second wave. I have no idea when it will end, but I'm determined to keep going until there's an ending. I started to write these poems when lockdown first started in March, I think it was, early March. And I just didn't know what to do with myself, like the rest of the world. But I got interested in the language of the pandemic. You know, I was reading papers every day, and certain words and phrases were being used, and of course they changed over time. And that is what got me interested in, first of all, collecting the words. I was simply adding words to a list. Then I thought, well, what do I do with this? And I started writing poems, you know, to the language of the pandemic. So it's very much a language-based book. But it also enabled me to continue. If I didn't have that device, yes, I probably would have given up early. But it's kept me going, and I'm still going. I'm still writing, and once I started posting them on social media, I started getting feedback, and it's just alerted me to the newness of this whole thing, and also to the value of poetry, that you can just throw it there in the world, throw it out into the world, and it gets around, and it comes back to you. And I felt, you know, in my childhood, we talked about call and response. You sit in a circle and you sit, or a lot of things are done where there's a leader who sings or whatever, and the rest follow. And that's part of the African tradition. And I thought, you know what, this is bringing us right back to that, where nothing exists outside of an audience or a reader. And the reader is what keeps you fed and nourished. And that my readers of pandemic poems on social media have kept me nourished, have kept me going.
It's just so great to see that you are evolving. Mm-hmm. Tell us about what kind of a mindset does a person have to just evolve with it? You're on social media, okay, I'm on social media too. I'm coming with poetry there, and that kind of call and response. It's a different space, it's a social media space, but you're still engaging. Yeah. What encourages you to do that?
Well, you know, I've always seen writing as engagement. I mean, one of the early essays I wrote about writing short stories is precisely this call and response. You know, when I was growing up, you'd have storytelling sessions, and the storytelling session cannot start without somebody saying crick crack whatever. And the point is you're always getting audience response, and people will either say, Lord, it's sweet, or it's salt. And I'm saying I learned that method of storytelling early in my life, and therefore my stories are all directed at a reader. Yes. And I'm sort of anticipating the response, and I want the response to be, Lord, it's sweet. I don't want anybody to say it's salt. So that continues to be what gives me, enables me to write the way I do, whether it's I'm writing for children or I'm writing books that are based on research, nonfiction, and so on. At all times, I consider the reader, at all times. And I don't know if you're familiar with my book. It's a very big book called Dying to Better Themselves, which is about the West Indians who built the Panama Canal. It's a huge book. And I had a hard time deciding. I wanted to write a book, though, that was accessible. You know, it's based on research. It's over a long period of time. There's a lot of technical stuff in it about digging the canal and stuff. But at the same time, I had to find a way of telling the story that would enable people to want to read it. And so even that book, which is scholarly, is based on the idea of call and response. It's in short chapters and in storytelling style. But that's because I respect my readers. And I'm conscious of the fact that writing doesn't exist just on the page. It's not flat on the page. You need to write in such a way that it will leap off the page and find a home in the hearts and minds of the people who are consuming it.
And so some of those stories that you've written about women, you've written about the social structure of society. Talk to us a little bit about some of the themes that are dear to your heart.
Yeah, well, that's a hard question to answer. What I'm trying to do, certainly in my fiction, is write the story of Jamaica in the sense of I'm trying to cover all demographics.
Yes.
You know, my early stories were based largely in rural Jamaica, but I've written about the city life. It covers young people, old people, and so on. So in a way, I'm testing myself to see how far I can take that. And the same with the poetry too. I mean, I'm exploring ideas that are out there in society, but I'm doing so, as I say, through voices mainly. And it's all the things that we live with. It's about injustice and poverty and wealth and, the rural-urban divide, and it's about crime, some of them. But it's also about beauty and about how simple things can loom large in somebody's life, So I try for complexity in that sense. I don't want to be just riding one or taking one path.
Yeah, so it's not just social commentary, for instance.
No.
It goes way beyond that.
Yeah. And I want to give back to Jamaicans, the young Jamaicans, something in which they'll see themselves, they'll see the reality of their existence, they'll see their faces, they'll see all the arguments about, for instance, I was shocked the other day to realize how much I talked about hair in all my work. Not just my children's book, which is called Bunununu's Hair, but looking back, because hair is such an issue, it's such a marker in our society.
But even in pandemic poems, you're talking about
there's
hair too.
Yeah. So so there's all of that. I'm trying to be really, a lot of my stories are socially, I describe it as social realism in a way. But I also I grew up in a society where we laugh at each other. We laugh a lot. Yes. There's a lot of humor. So I'd like to think there's also a lot of humor in my work. I use that.
There is. I wanted to talk to you about that because I was struck by the fact that one moment I was really serious going through a poem, and then by the time I got to the parentheses, I was just...
Well, in the poems, like saying a poem like Meditation on Yellow, which everybody knows.
Yes, that one in particular.
I am really writing back. That's one of the things, like in my colonial girls' school.
Yes.
And we got this wonderful colonial education, but there was nothing about us.
Yes.
And I am putting us into everything I write. And part of it is being cheeky.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And as the English would say, taking the mickey out of out of other people. That's my place. That's my right as a writer. I have the pen,
Yes.
and I'm going to use it. So I feel very strongly about that. But I've been traveling long across the sea in the sun hot. I've been slaving in the cane rows for your sugar. I've been ripening coffee beans for your morning break. I've been dallying on the docks, loading your bananas. I've been toiling in orange groves for your marmalade. I've been peeling ginger for your relish. I've been chopping cocoa pods for your chocolate bars. I've been mining aluminum for your foil.
Who are some of the people who've influenced your work, your way of writing, your style?
It's hard to say because I didn't grow up in a culture where I knew any writers or I had that kind of mentorship. Nobody really took me seriously when I said I wanted to be either an artist or a writer. I did art all through school, but I didn't have mentors in that sense who could say, this is what you need to do. So my life has been, in a way, a journey of sort of discovery, of finding out how to do it. And so a lot of what I learned about writing was through the library. I lived at Montego Bay Parish Library. I mean, honestly, and once I got to high school, and there's a librarian, I always talk about Mrs. Robertson, who people will remember from Jamaica Library Service, who let me into the big people library after I'd read out everything in the children's library, But so I learned to write from reading, which is a good way of doing it. But I also went to high school at a time when all the subjects required writing. You wrote essays for, except maybe math, but you wrote essays for everything, for biology and geography and English. And so I had a lot of writing practice. I had a good schooling in how to use language, how to express myself, how to organize ideas and so on. I think schools in those days really inculcated that use of language that people of my generation, especially writers, we all draw on that. But other than that, I think I have just learned by doing.
Isn't that such a strong message, even as you take on your responsibility as Poet Laureate, that people might be looking, young people might be thinking, it's inaccessible.
Yes.
It's serious and difficult.
Yes.
And yet here you are saying it can be discovered.
Well, my approach is, if you want to be a writer, don't come and tell me you would be a writer if you had the time or if you had it. Nonsense. The only test of your being a writer is that you write. And everybody, all you need is a piece of paper and a pencil or a tablet, whatever. And if you don't have that, you can use your mouth, especially in poetry, spoken word poetry. This is why poetry is a very democratic art. But you can write stories, you can tell stories. We are storytellers. Just listen to two people on the street talking. Those are storytellers. And so I think even if people nowadays think you have to go to school, you have to do a degree in writing, I don't think it helps if you have all of that. But if you don't have it, you shouldn't see it as a handicap. It's your job to learn as much as you can and to develop and to recognize the need for developing your craft. Writing is both an art and a craft, and that's something I'm very meticulous about, craft, in my work and in terms of my expectations of, say, my students and so on. It's your job. It's your job to learn your craft.
There's so much content to write about. I feel we're living in a time of activism where there's so much going on. I mean, you yourself in Pandemic Poems, you speak to the George Floyd issue, him wanting to breathe, and that has taken on such a life of its own. I wondered what you think about the age that we are living in and the area of activism and all there is to write about.
Well, it's going a bit too fast for me at my age. Every now and then I think, oh God, there used to be a film or a play called Stop the World, I Want to Get Off. That's how I feel a lot of times. But I also feel, I need to keep up until I'm in the grave, because otherwise, what else is there to do but sit around and moan and groan? So Yeah, it's very exciting, and I think it's particularly exciting for artists of any stripe, because now you can take ownership of your work.
Yes.
You don't have, I self-publish pandemic poems, just that, I mean, all my other books have publishers, but I wanted to do this because I want to test the waters.
Yes.
But now with social media, with all kinds of facilities, technological developments out there, if you're an artist, if you're a musician, you can do your thing and you can send it out into the world. So I think in a sense things have changed, which is not to say that big publishers still haven't colonized the space, or, you know, those people who are always there, but it also enables people who have been marginalized, who haven't had a voice, who don't have wealth or don't have access, that's the most important thing, to develop their own way of getting their story, their poem, their music across. And we're seeing that. And I think it's great. What I'm not sure about is, where is this taking us?
Yes.
How do we, you know, what's the end result of all of this? If every person is, you know, an author, an editor, your own musician, whatever, and we're breaking down a lot of the barriers or the norms associated with all the different art forms, what are the new forms that are going to develop? We haven't seen that yet. Yes. We don't yet know where we're going. But it's very exciting and very frightening at the same time.
His last breath, his need, please, somebody, taking the knee on the neck from men who from birth breathed in tainted air, imbibed a foul history, burning crosses, still smoldering. I can't breathe.
How have you experienced yourself, just as a poet, saying, okay, when I started, this is how I used to do it?
Yes. Well, obviously, I've learned a lot. I feel that I have really developed, especially in craft, because when I started, my first book was Summer Lightning, my first work of fiction. At that time, I didn't know what a short story was. I did not know that there was something called a short story, mainly because all the books we did in school were either novels or Shakespeare, you know, or full-length plays.
Yes.
And so I had no idea that there was something called a short story that had its own rules and so on. But I wrote that book, and for instance, I did things like I left a lot of the stories open-ended.
Yes.
Because to me, that's how it works. Whereas some people are horrified because, you know, yeah. Or a short story has to be a certain length. Well, a lot of my early short stories are novellas. They're quite long. I didn't know what I was doing. I just did it.
Yes.
And I had to sit down, because I did it with a typewriter, if people out there know what that is. In recent years, I decided, you know what, I need to input it into a computer. And I decided to do it myself, because I thought that when I was doing it, I would want to change a lot of things, because I'm saying, oh, I know so much more now.
Yes.
And I changed nothing in that book except maybe one or two spelling of the Creole, you know, that kind of thing. And it left me in awe of myself and what I did at that moment in time. And in a way, I could never write that book now, because there's a kind of innocence to it and a kind of honesty and that's very refreshing. But, you know, all writers capture that, I think, with one book at a moment in time. But I'm not I'm ashamed of some of the poems. I think, I could redo them. In one of them, actually, I've actually cut like a 30-line poem to 2 lines. But the fiction, I feel that I just hit it right from the beginning. And although I've learned a lot, I feel, those books can stand the test of time.
It's like you discovered your style without being trained into a particular
path.
path.
I just intuitively, I keep saying I'm an intuitive writer.
Yes.
I just I feel that this is what is right, this is where you end the story, this is how you do it. Which is not to say I haven't started many stories that I've never finished.
I was coming exactly to that. Because when you think of an intuitive writer, you then say to yourself, so does an intuitive writer have the writer's block, have the challenges? What kind of challenges have you faced as a writer?
Well, the challenge of starting something and not being able to finish it. That happens to everyone. You know, the challenge I have faced and most writers face is getting published. It's not only getting published, but then getting your book out there into the world.
Yes.
That's very difficult, especially for someone like me, because I'm all over the place. I've been published in England, my first books. I live in Canada, I've been published in Canada, I've been published in Jamaica, I've been published in, you know. And and also I write in different genres. Yeah. So it's very hard to package me. And in publishing, it's good if you can be packaged. Yes. You know, you're a commodity, you're out there. So that's been hard for me to, you know, to find ways of getting my work out. But I've been fortunate that I have got it out, but not always in the most desirable or lucrative kind of ways, you know. But you know what? I chose my life, I chose my path, and I'm very happy about what I've accomplished. I have absolutely no regrets about my writing life.
What do you consider one of the high moments or some of the high moments of your life and career as a writer?
You know what? The high moments for my life, for my career as a writer, are those moments when young people come up to me and say, "You inspired me to write. Can I give you a poem?" Or when my book was on the Cape syllabus, Gardening in the Tropics, I met with Cape students all over the Caribbean, which was one of the most enriching experiences of my life. Because, you know, Cape students, they're bright, they're articulate, and it was wonderful. I mean, I was talking to them, but a lot of what I enjoyed was them talking to me and sharing with me. It was very humbling in a way too, but it was also a learning experience in the sense that some of them were very astute readers, and they saw in my work things I didn't even know I had put there. But I would say the most joyful occasions in my life are those occasions when I meet readers, serious readers, not just people who say, "Oh, we like your work, we like the cover of your book, we like how you talk," but people who engage with the text and who are willing then to, you know, talk to you about that. But also the people who say, you know, I'm writing because I read your work, or I heard you speak or something. I think that's the greatest gift that any writer can receive.
And here you are in a position as the Poet Laureate to engage even more with these young people. Tell me what you're looking forward to.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I mean, I will be doing the things that Poet Laureates do, which is, you know, readings, workshops over the 3-year period. I mean, but I would also like to find ways of working with other artists, like musicians and dancers and so on, to move poetry, as I mentioned, from the page into that other sphere, to make films that involve poetry, because a lot of that is, in fact, is happening with my own poetry. Like somebody is choreographing a dance to my George Floyd poem, Breathe, for instance. Other people are using some of my poems in film. And several artists, Caribbean artists, have used my work as inspiration for their art. Ebony Pattison is one, and Jasmine Thomas Gervin. And so that has enabled me to see that there is scope for poetry out there. But also I look forward to finding ways of working with children, and I'm looking for help from teachers.
Yes.
With that, because I myself am not a teacher of small children, but I feel their poetry can serve as not just as a creative outlet, yes, but you know, it's proven to show how it can also help children cope, yes, with so much in life. And so I'd like to explore that, how I can use poetry, say, in schools and so on. So I mean, there's a lot of work to be done.
I know, but I sense that you have a special place for children.
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit about that?
Well, a lot of my early work actually is through the eyes of children and in their own words, because also people who are mentally ill, and not that I'm putting them in the same category, but I love to write about people or use the stories or the voices of people who are sort of innocent in a way of what it is that they're saying. They're unafraid. And so they will challenge authority with great courage. And so virtually all of my children are, as we would say, forthright and feisty, as you know, like the child who asked Archdeacon, do angels wear brassieres? You know what I mean? So I love to give voice to children because they are such truth tellers. And I also have like a woman in the story called You Think I'm Mad Miss, who, I don't know if you know it, but she confronts people at the traffic light. She's begging, but she's also telling her life story and cursing them and doing whatever she wants at the same time. So I like the idea of characters who are not afraid to be confrontational, you know, and I like to write those characters. And even in my poetry too, you see some of that.
Sir, what I want to know is this, for I can't find it in the Bible. Please, sir, do angels wear brassieres? Auntie Mary just that minute coming through the doorway with a full tea tray with Cherry carrying another big tray right behind her. Enough food and drink for 10 Archdeacon. Auntie Mary stopped braps in the doorway with fright when she heard Becca question. She stopped so sudden that Cherry bounced into her and spilled a whole pitcher of cold drink all down Auntie Mary's back. As the coldness hit her, Auntie Mary jumped and half her tray threw away on the floor. Milk and sugar and sandwiches are rained down on Archdeacon. Archdeacon jumped up with his handkerchief and started mop himself and Auntie Mary at the same time. He trying to take the tray from her. Auntie Mary at the same time trying to mop up Archdeacon with a napkin in her mortification, not even noticing how Archdeacon relieved that so much confusion come at this time.
Wow, you have had such vast experience, and you have also explored and been in Europe. You've been living in Canada. You're Jamaican. You're here right now. How do your travels and the different experiences living overseas? How has that influenced you and your work?
Well, you know, I'm glad that I've had that opportunity to travel the world, and that is something writing has given me. I keep on saying writing doesn't pay, but it does give you all kinds of other opportunities. And I feel that what it has done is enabled me to see Jamaica through different eyes, because it has given me distance and a perspective on that world. And I started writing when I went away to Canada to university. This was a long time ago. And that was the first time I was away from home for any length of time. And it was painful in a way, you know, dealing with winter and everything else. But for the first time, I was away from my emotional connection with place. And I could stand back and look at it objectively in a way I don't think I could have done if I'd stayed home. And that is what travel still gives me, something to use to measure Caribbean culture, which is sort of the focus of my writing, against other cultures, and to see where we position ourselves. So it has given me a very balanced view of life, of things, and so on.
How do you manage to remain connected to the things of the Caribbean and the diaspora in your work?
Yeah. Well, you know, social media has helped, because I'm not a great letter writer like some people, but I have always felt that I need to maintain the connection with Jamaica. So I've always come back home very frequently. I've never wanted to buy into privilege, you know, by living in a certain type of society. You know, I've always fought to just to be myself and to have that sense. And this is where coming out of a poor society does for you. It does give you, it does enable you to balance the wealth that's available on one side with what you know people are undergoing, people you know in another place. So I'm very conscious of that. And so in my own life, I've always strived for this balance, not to buy into, you know, a world where where everything is possible and where materialism reigns. You know, I've sort of resisted that to some extent. Not, you can't absolutely, but
why have you resisted it?
because I'm not a materialist. You know, I mean, I do like. I mean, the main thing for me is to have a private space, you know, the room of one's own where I can sit and write and be myself, which I have. And I like nice clothes, but other than that, I'm pretty cool about things. You know, I don't take anything for granted. I'm grateful for whatever I have, but at the same time, I'm a minimalist in a way. There's not a lot that I want to have, that, you know, that other people have. I have no interest in what other people have. I'm not envious or jealous of other people. I just live in my little world and do my thing.
But your little world, as you describe it, has created so much.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful.
Yeah.
That we can influence and express ourselves through poetry. Mm-hmm. You've lived that life. And perhaps sometimes some of us have put poetry in a box.
Yes.
If you're going to take it out of the box, can you, from your perspective, tell us about the power of poetry?
Yeah, because this is one of the things I want to disabuse people of, the notion that poetry is something you learn in school, and then the teacher, you have to write exams, and then you hate poetry. That's the point of it. But you know, the point is we are born to our mother's heartbeat. That is poetry, that is the rhythm, that's the beat of life. And our first words are usually rhyming. Mama, Papa, you know, this kind of thing. And we, you know, if you think about play, how children play, and so on, a lot of it is poetry in the sense that rhyme and rhythm are ingrained in us. And I suspect that poetry and song are the earliest art forms. You can see people gathering after the hunt and, say, you know, the leader singing or the great hunter and everybody. So it is the oldest art form. It's ingrained in us. It's embedded in us. And I think we need to let it go. We need to realize we're all poets. We all have that potential. So you can choose to write Paradise Lost, or you can write 2 rhyming couplets. You know, it doesn't make any great demands. So people are afraid of it because they think, oh, I have to be Shakespeare, or I have to be, I don't know. Nah, just be yourself and try and express what is in your heart and your soul. Now, you also should recognize there's poetry and poetry and poetry. You know, there's, and therefore you also ought to know what it is you want to be. What kind of poet do you want to be?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for spending time to talk about your work and your journey, and also for making poetry look so accessible.
Thank you. That's what I want to do, folks. Go out and read poems, write poems. We're gonna get people doing that.
During the ceremony of investiture for Jamaica's 3rd Poet Laureate since independence, congratulatory messages were shared by those who also have a vested interest in building and sustaining the creative capacity of this little island.
Miss Senior succeeds Miss Lorna Goodison, who was so recognized in 2017, and we want to thank Miss Goodison for her service to Jamaica as Poet Laureate. Miss Senior follows in the footsteps of other recognized Poet Laureates, including, of course, Claude McKay, John Clare Ebenezer McFarlane, Thomas McDermott, and in recent times, Professor the Honorable Mervyn Morris, all of whom have nobly carried the torch with their outstanding literary contributions and have made Jamaica proud. Miss Senior's contribution to the literary landscape at home and globally is well documented, as her citation will shortly highlight. In a recent collection of pandemic poems, First Wave, Miss Senior has shown how much she's in touch with life. Jamaican poet and playwright Jeffrey Phillip, in describing this critically acclaimed body of work, says, and I quote, in pandemic poems, Miss Senior captures the sense of dread that has affected us since the virus has crept into our lives. Pandemic poems offers a much-needed respite from the deluge of data that surrounds us and provides moment to pause and perhaps to find peace, end of quote. These poems are indeed a book for the future when we want to look back at these times. Miss Senior will leave her legacy as a poet in these unprecedented times, a time when the protocol requires us to sanitize our hands, to wear masks, social distance, and to take a vaccine. Much of our history and culture, ladies and gentlemen, and the struggles and triumphs of our forebears are captured in literary works. By interpreting and providing literary commentary on social events, our writers have recorded our history in a medium that will remain for posterity. Over the next 3 years, Miss Senior will be charged with creating an avenue for public involvement in the spoken arts by stimulating the writing of poetry and improving youth appreciation for poetry. I take this opportunity also to commend the Ministry of Gender, Culture, Entertainment, and Sports, and in particular the library, for the revival of the Poet Laureate Award as an expression of yet another avenue for the promotion of our rich culture and of our people. Thank you so much, Ms. Senior, for your dedication to your craft, and we look forward to your continued contribution to Jamaica over the next 3 years. Congratulations. Thank you.
I'm delighted to congratulate and recognize Poet Laureate Olive Senior. Olive Senior's contribution in the sector has been significant and has aided many developing poets and those in the literary field to reimagine the world through the intricate and creative use of words. Olive's impressive use of words to spark imagination and ignite the senses started early while she was a student at the Montego Bay High School. And according to her peers, she was always reading. It was therefore no surprise when Olive ventured into journalism. Olive Senior eventually became publications editor at the Institute of Social and Economic Research at the University of the West Indies, and has written 2 non-fictional books, The Messages Change in 1972, and the widely popular A to Z of Jamaican Heritage in 1983. She served as managing director of the Institute of Jamaica Publications and editor of the Jamaica Journal, a magazine which has consistently maintained high standards while presenting the history and culture of Jamaica to its people and the world at large. Olive has won several awards for her poetry and short stories, including the Institute of Jamaica Centenary Medal for Creative Writing in 1979. And in 2005, she was awarded the Musgrave Gold Medal from the Institute of Jamaica for her contribution to the field of literature. On behalf of the government and people of Jamaica, I salute and extend hearty congratulations to Olive Senior on achieving the coveted title of Poet Laureate. Indeed, her achievements remind us of the importance of reading and using words that convey empowerment and are impactful. We are truly proud of the work she has done in education, the accolades that have been bestowed on her, and more importantly, her contribution to the preservation of our culture.
My heartfelt congratulations to the distinguished Poet Laureate, Miss Olive Senior, who has for generations been a beacon of light for Jamaica, translating to readers across the globe the national cultural essence through her ever-expanding canon of acclaimed work. As an academic, a poet, historian, and a cultural activist, Ms. Senior has etched her name, but more so, all our names and identities, into the tapestry that is Jamaican cultural knowledge. Her diasporic focus especially allows Jamaicans and non-nationals everywhere to access thoughts, sensibilities, and actions towards a better Jamaica. If you have had the privilege of hearing Ms. Senior speak, you will be all too familiar with the reference of our local heritage. Hailing from the hills of rural Trelawney, the parish of Usain Bolt, and the parish of Miss V, who was the oldest woman in the world, merged with the then blossoming urban center of Montego Bay, St. James, and later Kingston. She experienced an upbringing firmly rooted in pride, purpose, and the sense of a supportive community. Ms. Senior often says unapologetically that she always knew she would become a writer. Through education, her sustained application of creativity, and an unwavering passion to give voice to the unspoken of Jamaica and the wider Caribbean region, she has delivered consistently through her gift of writing and is recognized as one of the most prolific poets of her time. Having produced some 18 books and countless other publications, Olive Senior still forges ahead as an innovator as she now uses her online platforms, of course, during the COVID-19 pandemic, which we are still facing, to creatively engage our audiences while developing yet another anthology of publications. Olive Senior is an educator par excellence. She has been conferred with numerous awards, such as the Writers' Trust of Canada Matt Cohen Award for Lifetime Achievement, Honorary Doctorate of Literature, University of the West Indies, Norman Washington Manley Foundation Award for Excellence in the Preservation of Jamaica's Cultural Heritage, Gold Medal of the Institute of Jamaica, University of the West Indies Humanities Scholar, Barbados, and among so many others. With an extensive track record of achievements, cooperation, selflessness, and service to country, the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport gladly commends to the Governor General of Jamaica, Ms. Olive Senior, to be conferred with the role and calling of the highest literary office of the nation, to be invested as the Poet Laureate of Jamaica 2021 to 2024. I would also take this opportunity to commend the efforts of the National Library of Jamaica for enlivening the Poet Laureate of Jamaica program. Since 2014, the National Library has led the charge of advancing Jamaican literature, its use and production across Jamaica. Your work directly impacts the development of Brand Jamaica, both at home and abroad, to ensure the sustainability for our nation's literary heritage. The library must continue to pivot itself to deliver information services to local and global clients in a true Jamaican style of excellence. Sound governance and creative ingenuity have advanced the function of the library in a technologically evolving world. The National Library of Jamaica is the institution charged with keeping the nation's knowledge, and it continues to exceed expectations through advocacy and innovation. We're certain, Ms. Senior, that the team behind your unique programs will ensure that they have far-reaching impact. Finally, as we continue to tackle head-on these challenging times, let us persist in our national responsibility of advancing our most valuable asset, cultural identity, through discerning and forging new paths of development. The Poet Laureate of Jamaica program will continue to be an exemplar of just that. And certainly Jamaica looks forward to when the National Library introduces the Junior Poet Laureate program. So the ministry congratulates you, Ms. Senior, and pledges its support towards your program, Building Jamaica, Land We Love.
This is a remarkable achievement in an already accomplished career, which includes 18 publications spanning fiction, non-fiction, poetry, and children's literature. It is indeed a true honor to be able to extend my appreciation for your accomplishments, even as I know that my few words will most certainly lack the color and vibrancy of your writing. This is also one of my very first public engagements here in Jamaica as the new Canadian High Commissioner. And I also want to take this opportunity to extend my thanks to the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sports, as well as the National Library of Jamaica for their roles in your appointment as Poet Laureate, as well as their roles in preserving Jamaica's rich and diverse culture. I'm an unabashed bookworm and reader, and what a treat it has been to discover your writing in these last weeks. I know that your works will be something I turn to in my years in Jamaica, and whose depth and meaning will become more real to me the more I'm here, even as I'm sure they will also influence my perceptions. Your works have shaped and interpreted understandings of Jamaica's rich history, providing portraits of culture, identity, belonging, race, class, and gender, writing that one can both devour and savor slowly. While I realize your writing is grounded so much in Jamaica, I'm also very proud that you're a fellow Canadian and wish to extend Canada's congratulations in celebrating this achievement as Jamaican Poet Laureate. This is a reminder of the many ties our two countries have and how writing remains so important as part of cultural identity. I do sincerely hope that our paths will cross in person at some point during my time here, and in the meantime, I look forward to your writing as one of my companions here on the island. Congratulations.
As the famous American poet Robert Frost said, a poem begins as a lump in the throat, a sense of wrong, a homesickness, a lovesickness. The poet has something to say, and the end result is unique for both the writer and the reader, as the word means something different to each of us. We see our environment with a new set of eyes and begin the journey of learning and unlearning, and this process reinforces our humanity. It is therefore my distinct honor to welcome Ms. Olive Senior as Jamaica's next Poet Laureate for the period 2021 to 2024. Ms. Senior has received wide acclaim for her contribution to the creative and academic expressions of Jamaican and Caribbean sensibilities and environments. A master of her trade, Ms. Senior has opened the gateway for many young Jamaican writers at the secondary and tertiary levels through her numerous works. As the next Poet Laureate of Jamaica, Ms. Senior will be invested with the authority to develop programs which will further structure and strengthen Jamaica's literary output. The mission of the National Library of Jamaica is to enhance the quality of life and prosperity of all citizens by acquiring, preserving, and providing access to Jamaica's cultural and historic information through research and education. The Poet Laureate of Jamaica program is therefore our way of bringing into public view the treasure trove of Jamaica's literary prowess contained in the hundreds of publications in the national collection. The program continues to thrive and is growing from strength to strength, and the Board of Management has committed to increased resources to ensure that Jamaicans at home and abroad can celebrate Jamaican poets and Jamaican poetry. Once again, I congratulate Ms. Olive Sr. on being selected and invested as Poet Laureate of Jamaica and welcome her into the NLJ family.
I am delighted and honored to be able to speak now, to welcome on behalf of the Poet Laureate Committee our new Poet Laureate, and delighted too at how happily she has welcomed the appointment. I can boast, I think, that Olive and I go a long way back. I remember speaking at the launch of her first book of poems, Talking of Trees, in 1985, at, if I'm not mistaken, the Bolivar Bookshop. I was impressed then by the promise it showed. She went on to build on that promise with collections such as Gardening in the Tropics and On the Roofs of the World, and to affirm her place as one of our leading poets. Her writing has ranged widely beyond poetry into prose fiction, nonfiction, history, not to mention the invaluable A to Z of Jamaican heritage, later called the Encyclopedia of Jamaican Heritage. All of these works in fields other than poetry enhance the contribution she will now make as Poet Laureate. What all of these works show is that her overarching subject is Jamaica and her exploration of self in her Jamaican groundings. It is more than a pointed coincidence that the very first poem in her first collection is titled Homescape and begins, I was born with the knowledge of mountains and solitaires, till jet planes and skyscrapers reduced this to mountains alone. She went to live in Canada many years ago and may be identified as Jamaican Canadian, but she remains essentially Jamaican. She has a home here, and she returns for an extended visit once a year. Her writing has also been augmented and no doubt reinforced by her work in editing, publishing, and management. She was for a time managing director of the Institute of Jamaica Publications and, outstandingly, the editor of Jamaica Journal. Her work in this regard helped to make the reputation of the journal, and it was not easy to find a suitable replacement when she left. Her experience and gift as manager and organizer will also redound to the benefit of her work as Poet Laureate. So too will her work for years now as a teacher of creative writing, both here and in Canada, by way of workshops and lectures and online. The youngsters, the would-be poets with whom she will engage, will be helped to find their voices and to extend our poetic tradition. I am happy to welcome Miss Olive. I'm grateful to have been able to speak now. The National Library's historic contribution to our culture by the institution of the Poet Laureate program has been further cemented. Things have come full circle. Give thanks.
In my capacity as member of the Poet Laureate Committee and a senior lecturer in the Department of Literatures in English at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus, it is with dancing delight that I bring greetings on the occasion of the investiture of Olive Senior as Poet Laureate of Jamaica. As daughter of the Caribbean sun, Olive Senior has had a distinguished career as creative writer and chronicler of Caribbean culture, who has shone the brilliant light of her creative talents throughout the world. It is entirely appropriate and a special blessing that she has been chosen for the role in this COVID time of fear, anxiety, and uncertainty. We know Olive Senior as a woman of daring, one who has deep roots in the survival rituals of our people. It is exciting to welcome her back home to Jamaica for this role. Although Jamaica is never far from her heart, nor ever forgotten in her writing. With Senior's expansive creative range, she has been a much sought after workshop leader and teacher internationally. She has been on the faculty of the Humber School for Writers, Toronto, and has taught creative writing at various universities, including University of Toronto, St. Lawrence University, and Columbia University, New York. She has also led writing workshops at the University of Miami, the University of the West Indies, and in the Bahamas, Bermuda, the USA, the UK, and France. Her extraordinary talent to engage a very young in the high school workshops here in Jamaica at the UWI Western Jamaica campus and at Mona, as well as engaging with the more mature in creative writing workshops she conducted for a department at UWI, is by now legendary. Olive Senior is much loved, a source of inspiration, or national treasure. We are fortunate to have her accept this appointment. And as she follows in the footsteps of her fellow poets, Mervyn Morris and Lorna Goodison, I know she will bring her own particular brand of Olive Senior wonder, grace, and courage to the role. Congratulations on being named Poet Laureate of Jamaica, and I wish you every success in this office.
Embark on this 3-year journey with Olive Senior to reclaim and reconnect to a shared history, heritage, and culture carried throughout the ages by storytellers and poets.
I saw my land in the morning, and oh, but she was fair. Come see my land, come see my land, before the particles of busy fires ascend, before the rivers descend underground, before coffee plantations grind the mountains into dust, before the coral dies, before the beaches disappear. Come see my land, come see my land, and know that she was fair.